sort of wondering what was going on there. By the way, there's a fine picture of the Great Hall at Union Station. So that's the room we're in. Just imagine we're in that room. Oh, it's filling up. Been quite pleased. So people have been hanging in. It's quite a lot to be part of all this for such a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge that I've seen a lot of groups. We have a local planning transportation conference, and they had to switch gears real quickly from a June to September conference, and it's a learning experience for everyone. So I'm going to be interested to see how TRB works out this year and other conferences, big conferences as well. So
it's going to be spread out over a month. So it's going to be a real challenge. I don't envy them at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Staff trying to figure that out. This was hard enough with 250 people and 100 speakers. So we'll see. We're getting up there. Just hang in for a few minutes. We'll start shortly. Okay, I should make sure my phone is muted this time. Yeah, okay. Okay, Willem, what do you think?
I'd say get going.
Okay, let's get Plenary 5 going. I'm Brendon Hemily, as you probably all know by now. And as I mentioned in the side presentation this morning, for those that were there, been monitoring this whole issue about data and its use for transit planning and operations for a long time. Transit agencies for a long time were had to focus on quality assurance, just cleaning up the data, making it usable. Turns out that still is a big challenge, but at least the leaders and the ones that are thinking about using data actively have now moved into a stage where they're dealing with data management. So we thought it'd be useful to organize a specific panel discussion on this topic. And I've assembled, I'm really pleased, this is a stellar group of the leaders in the field that I know of doing data management and data analytics. And you can see in the program the titles, but we've got from Chicago, STL, Société Transport Laval, Minneapolis, Vancouver, and New York City, which I know from personal experience, all of these are on the cutting edge of using data. So we're going to have this session, sort of have an informal discussion with the panelists. No presentations, but it's sort of divided in 5 parts. After this introduction, then we'll sort of, I'm asking all of the panelists to spend 4 or 5 minutes focusing. I had given them a number of questions or topics, and just pick a couple that they feel strongly about or want to talk about. And then we'll do that as a first round. And then we'll dive into 2 specific issues, one on internal data management challenges, and then another one on hiring, training, the qualified staff you need to really manage data and use it. And then we'll open up to questions. So with that, maybe to start off with, we'll just go in the order that was in the program for the first round, and then we'll start with that. So Ray, why don't you start?
Oof. Hi, my name's Raymond Chen. I'm the business intelligence developer at the Chicago Transit Authority within the data analytics team in technology. And part of my role in what was previously planning and now in technology is to help manage and consume the data in the agency. I've had a really interesting background as a civil engineer, doing transportation work, but also hanging around a lot of computer scientists. So I've had a very unique role within the agency, really trying to understand both the transit and data and technology side, which they seem very much the same. But I think as John presented at TRB, for those of you who weren't there, he showed a picture of a chimera, just he'll probably describe it more than I will, but it's a Renaissance man. It's a handyman for everything in your agency to really bring it all together. We have folks at the agency that are separate, that purely do data, purely do technology work, purely do planning work. And it's really tough for them to kind of get together into a room and to talk about a common problem at the agency, because there's so much, there's a huge gap between what everyone understands. If you just bring a pure data person into the agency, like they may not understand why the data is structured the way it is, whereas a planner may not understand how to manage a large sum of data, or they may not understand the statistics. We've talked about, you know, at many places, the using data scientists to really kind of bridge the gap. But data scientists are really expensive. Before this call, I looked up kind of the average salaries of people in transit versus the average salaries of data scientists, you know, and every day I kind of look at my paycheck and go, well, I could make a lot more money by not being in transit, just using the data science side, which is a real shame, because while we all want those skills to trickle down into our pure analysts or sort of our planner analyst roles, it's not there yet. So is the industry going to try to raise salaries to bring in these technically minded folks to kind of bridge the gap until, you know, data analysts become like typing, right? Like we don't talk about typing as a skill anymore at the agency. It's just something that we are given, that's a given, that someone knows how to type or use a computer. But that used to be a specialized skill, but we don't really know where the specialized skills will be in the next 5 to 10 years. So how do we make those decisions today? I don't know. I've always tried to spread programming and data analysis techniques throughout the agency, but it's really tough for people who have a full-time job doing something else, and they might have to be at a community meeting, or they might have to help deploy something in technology, and they're not focused on any particular thing. And it's not as though someone who can program can just start doing data analysis, or someone who does data analysis can suddenly start deploying applications from start to finish. I didn't keep my stopwatch on, so I don't know how far I am, but I'll end it with, I think a lot of the challenges is not just like us as an agency, but is more of a industry-wide problem. We see these tools, but the labor market is just so tight right now. It's really hard to even try to get people interested without, you know, going a purely intrinsic route of saying this is really good for society.
Yeah. All right. Those are good points, and we'll come back to the whole hiring and so forth. Pierre, why don't you give a few comments?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Just a few words to tell Brendon it's an honor for me to be invited on such a prestigious panel today. As you probably guessed, Laval is not quite among the top 20 cities in North America, considering its population, 400,000, or its normal transit ridership, 20 million a year, excluding obviously this year where we're down by 50%.
But it is special. On data.
Quite special. So like Raymond, I'm a civil engineer. I graduated almost 40 years ago from École Polytechnique in Montreal. And after 15 years at university, studying, teaching, or doing some research on simulation models and users' model behavior, I switched on the other side of the fence in a transit operator to see if what was developed in universities was really helpful and to work with real people having real problems. No need to tell you I was shocked. In my first week in Laval Transit, I had more decisions to take than in all my university years, confronting my analytical engineering personality with something not really in my DNA. So at that time in 1997, we had almost no data. As I was considering a more than 1 week career in Laval, I had no choice. I needed some data. we started in 1998 with GPS infrared passenger counters on a few vehicles. Then in 2007 on the old fleet, followed by real-time information in 2009, anonymized smart card fare box data in 2011. And we're now managing a data warehouse, including transit signal priority data collected since 2007 by our buses every day. I've always been in the planning and development department, but we mostly focus in the first years on operational planning, route stops, trip times, frequencies, schedules, driver's assignment. There was frankly no plan to build a data warehouse at the beginning. The approach was really problem-driven, and the data was first used to solve planning, trip times, and frequencies states. Despite a questionable quality control, we decided to open our data to operations department through basic Excel files, macros to develop and address operational problems. Obviously, our data was challenged, and this drove us to develop more robust validation algorithm and to be near the needs of people. So we wanted to give operations staff tools to answer questions they had. What happened to trip times when the bus is driven by driver A or driver B? What's the on-time performance of every bus trip of each driver? Can we reward our best drivers? Can we help drivers to convince us they experience true problems? Can we help supervisors to understand what's happening? So if I may summarize our organizational model, the overall approach was and is still developed by planners in an operational planning development department. Data scientists work in the planning department and are leading the data warehouse evolution while IT is implementing it and maintaining it. Discussions between planning and communications department lead to new applications to meet the needs of transit users. Between planning and operation, discussion lead to application to meet operations staff needs. And between planning and data scientists and planning traditional professionals, developer planners, to lead to new tools to improve service planning. So every new application or tool is first developed by planners to test a recipe. Once the recipe is established, professional and robust applications are reprogrammed, implemented, and maintained by the IT department. Every new technological system is thought not only to address its goal, but is always a vector to get new types of information to be integrated in the data warehouse. New technological system are also a vector to get old types of information, as we're not afraid by redundancy here. We have many GPS systems, 2 passenger counter system, one based on smart card and fare boxes, the other on infrared counters. It allows validation, but also allows us to address new questions like fraud or things like that. There were some indicators of the level of accuracy of data that were also developed to get rid of fake data. As Brendon told us, he knows we could go on all forever on these topics. We'll stop right now and we'll go on in a few minutes on the questions and your plan, Brendon.
Thank you, Pierre. That's a great overview. And yes, being part of this team, being part of this process and this discussion has nothing to do with the size of the transit system. It has to do with the sophistication of the data collection and its use. So, John, you're up.
Hello, I'm John Levin. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Metro Transit, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And just for reference, that's, in north central United States, medium-sized region, about 3 million plus in the region. And we're a medium-sized transit agency, so somewhere in between, the Chicagos and New Yorks and the Lavals. And that, I think is really important to think about the size of an agency in terms of both its capacity and in terms of the challenges that it's trying to address. So, we're an agency that's still addressing, trying to grow ridership as much as manage ridership. And that, drives then how we use the data, what types of questions we're trying to answer, but those are your traditional questions of, who's riding, where are they riding, what's our speed and reliability. And then of course, 2020 has thrown a lot of curveballs at us in terms of, the questions that we're asking in terms of public health, and principally in terms of loading, but also questions that we're asking in terms of who's riding and for what purpose, and this notion of essential workers, essential trips, and also questions of social equity that have arisen. That's really driving a lot of our work in our agency right now. And our questions about what data do we have and how do we use the data are questions of social equity in terms of our service design and delivery. So that's been a really, kind of emerging areas I think are really important. And I think how we manage our data, the data that we collect, even when we don't know what we're going to do with it, and the flexibility that we have to quickly turn and answer new questions in terms of the technical ability and the staff ability are both really important when it comes to how a transit agency is developing their transit capacity. Just a few things I was going to talk about just in terms of structurally as an organization. Like many organizations, we have our operations departments that tend to own and manage the operational systems, AVL, ABC, fare collection, other systems. Then we have an information services group that provides the infrastructure, the databases, the networks, et cetera, for all that. And then my department, Strategic Initiatives, founded about 5 years ago, was really founded around this notion. We have all this data, and we have analysts who are using the data for performance measurement and operational management in their departments. But there's so much more we know we could do with that data. How do we do that? And so we created a Strategic Initiatives department. And we really have, though, two focuses within one department. And that's another thing that I'm seeing through the conference is you really can look at data as a performance management, performance measurement type of tool and create dashboards and continually monitor your key performance indicators and use those to drive your decision making. So that's certainly one piece of our department. But we also have a research and analytics group that's focused around using data in new ways, using more statistical techniques, building models, and merging data sets from disparate locations, and trying to answer tend to be what smaller but more challenging questions around what could we do differently as an organization. And that was another thing I was going to mention is we really tend to try to focus on what actually drives decision making in the organization, what actually drives people's jobs, because there's so many things you can do with data that are really interesting, that tell you what you already know, so that's satisfying. But really seeing new insights or helping to drive decisions that might be counterintuitive is really important. And I'll get back to that in a second. I know we'll get to this in a moment, but we have the same common challenges that I've heard throughout the conference so far, in terms of accessing data quality, creating front-end tools that users are actually going to use to do their work. And so that's been, an ongoing challenge that we're trying to address, every day. And then to raise comments, around data science and data scientists, that has definitely been part of our role in the organization, is to bring in this concept of the data scientist and to provide that service across the organization. So while we have business analysts around the organization, we really have centralized the data science function within Strategic Initiatives in our department, and a really highly collaborative group where we're building on a community of practice really of data science within the broader transit agency. And so that structure of when do you distribute, use a federated model, when do you bring people together into a centralized unit is really an interesting discussion and decision that an organization has to make with their staff. Last thing I was going to mention is just the other thing is the platform that you use to deliver your products. And I've seen a lot of different approaches to that so far, and that's certainly really an ongoing discussion for us, is what platform we want to develop on. So we use actually both Power BI as a platform. We've used Tableau a little bit, but we also use R and our Shiny and Shiny Server as a way to deliver tools within the organization. And there really are pros and cons on both sides of those two different models, and kind of figuring out what applies when and what types of resources to apply for different challenges is an ongoing part of the conversations that we have in our group. about how we're going to apply the resources that we have to help solving the problems of the organization. I'll leave it at that and look forward to continuing the conversation. You're muted, Brendon.
John, sorry, quick question, clarification. Who do you report to?
So I am technically on the org chart. I am part of a department that are a group that is called Planning, Evaluation, and Marketing. So it's a service development marketing group and TOD actually. Right now, without a when we originally were created, I was reporting to the general manager, and I'm still reporting to the general manager because we have a vacant position. But structurally, I'm within a planning and evaluation group.
Okay, great, thank you. Teresa.
Hey, hello everyone, and thanks Brendon for this invitation. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Teresa O'Reilly, and I'm the manager of system analytics at TransLink. And for those of you who aren't familiar, TransLink is the multimodal regional transportation authority for the 23 jurisdictions in Metro Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. And we are primarily, while we're multimodal, most of our data by far comes from our transit service network. So AVL, APC, smart card data from buses, passenger ferries, light rail, commuter rail, and our custom transit network. And this data is growing exponentially, as we all know. And we did a lot of work over the past 5 years that we're now benefiting from during this pandemic. So we're able to shift and be agile and adapt to support the decisions and strategies that are necessary now. And I really appreciate some of the commentary already, because I can basically say ditto to most of what has been said. So I think I'll focus a little bit on our data management challenges and a little bit of experience from what we've been going through over the past 5 years. And our data management challenges started about 5 years ago with a TAP. This is when TransLink moved to our smart card fare payment system. This system came in with high expectations of what we're able to do to transform our business decisions using evidence-based inputs, yet the data was incomplete and simply not optimized for our business team's needs. So I'm sharing this experience today with you from my vantage point of one of those business teams, the business team that needed to use this data. My colleagues and I had to report on ridership. We had to create new ridership estimations and even travel behavior insights to our planning division and to the broader organization. I'm a planner. I don't know data. I have to look up whether you say SQL or SQL. Database management was something that happened in IT I had no idea about. So my experience coming into this, I had to really learn from my staff, and I was gifted when I came into this department with some really intelligent, bright, and innovative staff. One of whom I'll mention is here today, Graham Brown, and was instrumental in some of the initiatives I'll talk about. So I feel that our data management challenges that we experienced stem from a misalignment of expectations and an increasingly tech-savvy staff who are in the business units, not in the IT or business technology divisions where they usually are. So TransLink had established a highly centralized model for smart card business intelligence. This is a model where the data cubes would be developed for planning and operational staff. But the big data work that we'd envisioned didn't come from a data cube. We were already pulling in data from disparate multiple sources and testing the limits of Excel. So a data cube just wasn't going to cut it. And my team requested read-write access to the enterprise data warehouse, which was not going to happen. So when that wasn't possible, we asked for a copy of a separate SQL server. Hashtag planners can code. And this was really where we're at that nexus of business technology and transit planning knowledge coming together. So Raymond, you mentioned the typing. It's not a skill. Well, we don't have a typing pool anymore either. So this is where we're starting to see this merging and blending of roles and responsibilities that were challenging our status quo. So we did get that server, and we still use it today. And with it, we were able to advance some of the analytics and tools and visualizations that we share externally with audiences, and really do a lot of our planning decisions around internally. And this is very similar to Pierre's approach in Laval, where we are able to bridge that IT knowledge with subject matter experts, where we can create a tool, and when it's ready and tested, we can put it over to their business technology colleagues, and they are able to productionize it. But having a copy of the data on a server solved some urgent issues at the time, but certainly this decentralized model introduced new problems with the hashtag planners aren't database administrators. So we've had some really fundamental and exploratory work that's been done with our data, and some of our advances that we'll be seeing will be only possible once we get a new analytical environment. And we're working on this now. In 2018, TransLink developed a new business intelligence strategy to provide business units with an environment for fast processing, accessing data, a space for complex queries, and the ability to create tools and new data. And this strategy better reflects our understanding of the various business teams' needs and skills, and it's a balanced approach between that centralization and decentralization that we experienced earlier. And I think it's, and we will be successful with it. But the strategy comes after a lot of internal collaboration on very successful analytical initiatives. And these efforts really delivered on that workplace collaboration benefits that have been claimed, including an understanding of what roles and skills we have in different parts of the organization, and building social capital among staff and divisions to have that space for understanding, to create common goals, and align our expectations. So before smart card data, I have to admit that my team had little to no interaction with our business technology support teams, and it's no wonder that we had misaligned expectations about data access. So the new strategy is still being implemented, and we still have some struggles, which we can talk about again, but I'd like to also just note that part of what we discovered when we're working together is that we created a common knowledge of skills, but we still have a different approach of using different languages and software and platforms to create our tools. So we're still working on making space for the diversity of ways that people work with data. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Very interesting. That sort of raised all sorts of issues. I especially like the last one, language. What I hadn't thought about that as much as sort of different perspectives and objectives, but it's sort of a little bit like transit people trying to work with traffic engineers for putting in TSP. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same objectives, but they don't speak the same language either. Alla, why don't you talk about your experience?
Thanks, Brendon. I just wanted, my name is Alla Reddy. I'm in charge of data research and development. That's the unit like 3 years back I created to separate from system data research. I used to be in charge of 42 people, and we are big in data in the transit. So actually I grew up in data from the beginning. My major is operations research. That's what my interest. So everything, wherever I see the data, anything like manual. So I try to automate that. So there are a lot of challenges there, and organization changes. Each time we have to go through so many steps. So data. I mean, so many types of data there. People talk about regular scheduled data, bus side, subway side, all the timetables, vehicle movements data on the subway side. We have so many different type of systems. Automated train supervision system that's like 1 through 6 lines. That's all like kind of, we have data mart, we get the data feed and everything. On the CBTC, everybody knows that. That's kind of, we get that, sometimes we get that feed, but depend upon ownership, sometimes these are all proprietary. even though new systems, technology is new and all that, we are unable to get that feed, from people who, like Thales, Siemens, people like that, it's not structured properly. So, and older technology like program logic controllers, so those are the ones basically track circuit data. It has been there since last 50 years. We are trying to explore that because we don't have the latest technology, but we are interpreting that pieces of information and transforming into data and converting into report structure. So that's the most challenging thing. And you all know that New York City, more than 100-year-old system, and still we have towers, and there are people there who don't even see the trains based on the closed circuit TVs. They manage the service. So that means they don't know exactly where the trains are, which is kind of very challenging things. I kind of, this was one of my interests. I got involved in that and tried to get with the contract project management, all these contracts, everything going on. There are projects there, mega projects, hundreds of millions of dollars. By the time they roll out this project, it takes years. And that's only meant for typical operations, but it's not meant for data. We don't get any feed. Anytime we ask for data, we don't get anything. So those kind of challenges we are facing, but I managed to work with contractors and operating people, and actually big support from upper management, leadership, they kind of, supported me and tried to work with one of the contractor. It's a part of one piece. For a testing purpose, I took advantage of that and I got the data and transferred that information into some kind of tools. The system, they never able to look at the trains and displaying that visually. So which is kind of very challenging, and it's interesting also. The information stream is unbelievable, so much information there. But you need to maintain the quality. You need to buy in from the leadership, which is another thing, Every time you do something, it's not that easy. And we bring the staff. I used to have bigger staff. Now, because of organization changes, because of this hiring freezes, budget constraints, so many things, we lost like 50% of talented people. It took many times to build that, bring all the people, smart people all over the places, and we train them, and they learn about in transit how to take advantage of information, and they build a lot of tools. But if you need to give them incentives, you need to encourage them, you need to give them, that's what I kind of behind, trying to encourage them, bring them to the leadership, and try to. But it's not easy, because this budget constraints, all kinds of things, and they're very attractive. They can get 6 figures anywhere once they're trained. So those are the challenges I'm facing. It's not very simple, and but we accomplish a lot. I think in the industry, on the data side, even though we are a tiny group, we kind of put out a lot of information to the public, created a new customer metrics, for the public side, and created a data visualization for internal operations. So one of the greatest things, I work very close with the operating people. They don't communicate, they know they want, but they don't know how to communicate in details. But once you understand them, they open up and they talk to you. That's why I always talk to them and try to build some of the tools for them and help them out. And it's working, improving the service, But it's ongoing exercise. It's not that simple. But sometimes, you get in the middle, in between the contractors or consultants, and they do their own things, but we are not part of the loop. If you don't know what kind of data you're getting, you need to be involved from the scratch. So we are kind of, I'm trying to get into that role, facing that problems, and I think they recognize that, because recent challenges, we took advantage of some of these APCs, automated passenger counters from the buses, which is kind of, we are not collecting the fares or anything, everybody getting on and off, from the back doors, all that. So we came up with a new idea and, measuring that, how many people get on and get off. So that data we started reporting, and using that concept, we started even reporting real time, because there are no fares there based on automated fare collection. Looks like we collected only 2% or 1% from express buses. Rest of the things we don't know. We are not collecting. So we kind of measure all those ridership and try to report to the operating people or to the public also. That's a very challenging thing. Very creative. Sometimes you come up with new ideas.
Yeah.
Having this, it helps.
Yeah. Thank you all. That's the whole issue about the fact that the data was that Teresa brought up, and it's reinforced by what Alla and a couple others have said about the fact that the systems were not designed for data; they were designed for other purposes, and we're trying to shoehorn what comes out of them into useful analytics. Alla's experience with New York City Transit gives a whole new definition of legacy systems when you're dealing with 100-year-old track circuits and trying to make that into modern dashboards. Let's turn again, and that was a good segue into the data management challenges. But to launch that, we've got a little polling question. Willem, are you there?
Here I am.
Can you bring up the one about how difficult has it been?
Yes, I can. I'm going to launch it right now.
Okay. Now, this is, of course, sort of aimed more at the transit agencies. So for other people, you could sort of take your guess at what the answer should be. But how difficult has it been to set up an internal data management process? We're not talking about data quality. We had that question in the session earlier today. But this is more about these different models and different choices about where the data resides, who has access to it, what kinds of tools do you develop, what kinds of business practices, and so forth. So why don't we take 30 seconds just to fill it in, and I'll let Willem decide when it's good.
Brendon,
Yes.
There's a bias in these questions. The answer easy is not there.
I'm
More
sorry.
simple is relatively
I'm sorry.
manageable.
I should have also put them randomly in order. Yes, you are absolutely correct. I bowed to the expertise of the data specialist. So how are we doing, Willem?
Pretty good. It's leveled off. 65% voted.
Okay.
Give it just another couple seconds here for the last few people to make their choices. It's always a rush when you announce you're going to end polling, you know? All right.
Oh, wow. Pierre, I'm not sure if we had put easy, whether that would have really biased the answer very much. But that's interesting. It's a bit more balanced than I thought. So that's, I guess that's an optimistic thing to think about. So in terms, we've already had a couple of interesting observations about where to locate, where is the location of the data, and I guess the separation of the data base and data management versus the people that use it. And Pierre had one model. Teresa was talking about migration of models, the centralized versus decentralized. I know there's no right answer, but I'm just sort of curious because sometimes the data resides with IT. In fact, I've been hearing from people that there's a increased push by IT groups to, I guess there's a realization that, data and information is control and power from an organizational behavior point of view. And I see I've been sensing more movement for IT groups to take more control of that, which I guess would be one form of centralized data versus in planning, which tend to be the most obvious users. But Alla's a different group, different process again, because it's within the operations group and his focus has been more to support the operations dispatchers and so forth. Why don't we start off, maybe Teresa, you could build on the comments you made about the centralized versus decentralized, and what do you think about that sort of thing? Without understanding that you don't want to say anything that really will negatively affect your future relationship with the IT group or anybody else for that matter. So, but
I'll think about my
face.
yeah, my job security here. I have a great deal of respect for our colleagues who are on the IT business technology side, and we it's not an us and them, it's an us together, and we've really added value by understanding what each group needs to do and what we need to be successful. Because ultimately we each have to report up to our VPs, and we report up to the CEO, our board, our taxpayers and the stakeholders that we serve. So in this respect, what we found is that especially for this big data that is system-wide, it's not just the planning department that needs this. The operations need this, finance needs this information. So to make the data available to those groups means that it does have to be centralized to some extent. And the centralization is the ensuring that we have a space and the processing power for all those queries for however folks want to access it and however frequently they want to access it, or if we're running automated reports. I think the other element of that is the data quality, where once it comes down to the end user and we find data issues, when we have the data ourselves, we can fix it, but that means that the data isn't fixed for everyone. And we're not hiring enough people and those really expensive data scientists to fix all of these problems here. They need to be fixed just for our use. They should be fixed at a central location and available for everyone. And likewise, when we create a tool and we think it's useful for others, we want it back into the production. We want it centralized so that we're not a bottleneck where our team has access to that specialized tool who can give that specialized insight. And then everyone's dependent on us, and we become a bottleneck, and we're hoarding the information in that way, when it can actually be sent back to the central data, probably cloud, and accessible by others in the organization who can add value to it and create the insights and decision support tools that they need to do their business.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm going to turn to Pierre now, because I think this discussion also depends a little bit on large versus medium-sized agencies. I'm leaving aside small ones because the issues are much simpler, but I've always had the perception that large ones theoretically have more resources and more specialized staff, but the internal bureaucracy makes it actually much harder to actually get anything done. While I've always observed that in general, medium-sized systems can be much more nimble and innovative if they want to. But I don't know, Pierre. I'll turn it to you to sort of talk about that issue.
Okay, but yes, it has to a certain extent. It depends on the size, and at STL, we have the old planning department is about 20 persons, and the data scientist teams is maybe 4 or 5 persons. They're almost all attending at Transit. The whole team is there. We have a small team. I think that the database evolution, all of this should be centralized, but we're working with Tableau and trying to develop things so that people can use, the usage can be decentralized. There are maybe 10 or 15 persons out of 20 in the planning department who can use Tableau, can access those data. People from the operations, on the operations side, this is the step we have to do. very interested in the data. There are some questions they would like us to look at and to develop tools for them. But ultimately, it would be interesting for those people to have experts in data. Actually, it's people in the operations are very not very technical, not very. There was no formation. La formation, Brendon.
Training.
There was no training, much training on data usage in the other different departments. They know the problems. Actually, we centralize the problems and try to find some solutions for them. But ultimately, it would be interesting to have a more decentralized approach.
I'm not sure where, I mean, there's so many different issues, but that's sort of my perception of the difference between a business analyst and a data scientist. But but that the whole issue that raises that if you actually have an agency that's interested in database decision making, then you start getting lots of requests to develop tools, and how do you prioritize which one gets served first? But maybe I'll turn to Ray. Ray, I mean, if it works, I can't quite see. Oh, there you are. Well, you're in a big agency. So it's a different.
And I've worked in a medium-sized agency when I was at Pace. So
right.
I definitely agree with you that it's really interesting to see how much more resources doesn't necessarily mean faster action. It survives more because there's more people that would have learned it through osmosis at a big agency, but there's also a lot more formalization. There's just, at a small agency, you can get everyone into a room because everyone doesn't have a packed calendar. It's just more likely you get the 6 or 8 people into a room, lock them in, and then have a decision by the end of it. But when you start getting larger and larger, that just doesn't exist anymore. So in some ways, it's almost that the specialization hurts us a bit. And I know that Jason Lee over at Muni kind of mentioned that data scientists don't always need to have the background in transit. And that's part of the problem, is that like once we have these specialized database administrator roles and these deployment roles and planners and pure analysts and pure mathematicians, they don't all talk to each other. So there is this there's this overhead of having to transfer those that need the requirements in the technology world sense between users to get to this end product. Whereas if you had someone who could do all of those steps, you don't have to talk to yourself over like, well, I need to structure the data this way so that it deploys correctly that way. Like all of that is managed, so you get a more efficient path. But those just it's harder to find those folks at larger agencies at times because you're really put in a specialized position. So it's almost, the scale hurts us in a way.
Yeah, I've sometimes felt that way. How about John? Thoughts that you have, medium-sized agency?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, I guess one thought I have listening to this conversation is that data, any given data set is not just one thing. Catherine Vanderwart from WMATA had a great presentation this morning just about the 7 or 8 forms of AVL data. And some of it coming from different systems, but oftentimes, the model that we've really come to settle in on, is through an iterative process, has been really to say, first and foremost, we want to get data out of the operational systems into an operational data store. So that's just a copy of the data. Then we want to maybe get the data into a data mart where we've done some processing. Then maybe we want to get the data into a reporting database. The same data exists 4 or 5 times within different systems, and they're all can be owned and managed by different groups and managed in different ways. And so I think that's an important element of kind of thinking about how we work with this data, is that it isn't just one monolithic AVL data system, right? It is, we have, for APC, we've got probably a dozen different places where we have APC data that have been processed in different ways and are useful for different purposes and are managed by different groups with different, roles of IS. I mean, for us, we're in an interesting situation in terms of how we're structured. as an operating division of a much larger organization because we're part of the MPO in the region. And so that centralized IS function is one step further removed from the transit operation, which gives us a little bit more flexibility, but also a little less direct connection with that group. So, you know, I think that,
oh, we've lost you.
there we go, sorry.
Okay.
That piece of how kind of, you know, data exists in different ways, though, I think is an important part of how organizations address this challenge.
Alla, do you want to add any thoughts about this?
So we have big IT department, you know, that's as far as the backend concern about the servers, data storage, you know, and all that, you know, still, you know, we try to communicate with them and make sure, you know, everything is organized, you know. Sometimes when you want to add more data and everything, then, you know, they will ask us to procure more servers. So we ask them why not they procure, but the thing is it takes forever, you know, by the time they get it. So we get involved a lot into technical side also. That's why I created a kind of a small group infrastructure. So they're a little bit more technical. They can able to communicate with IT, but going through IT process takes much longer. So we expedite and getting support from upper management and try to pull together and build some of these servers, things like that. You know, it's a complicated exercise, and at the same time, our analytical people, they're all analysts, started as analysts, right after the colleges or, you know, with master's degree like that. But we train them to be data scientists, data infrastructure group, you know, kind of divided, so that way they interact each other, front end, back end, people able to, you know, build some other tools. Some people are interested building some visualization tools. That's why we created our own public type dashboards. It's not like, you know, Power BI, things like that. We experimented, it did not work because very dynamic, constantly we need to change. And internally we created some of the dashboards, which is kind of useful for operating people. And they're kind of, you know the process, and they look at on a daily basis, how is the performance, what's going on. So we manage all these things indirectly, but we still work with IT on the backend side. As far as applications, front end, we do that. So we have pretty good control about the data, because anytime, it took years. It's not, don't expect anything, you get the data that quick, you know, it took many years, you know, to get that, you know, recognition, all that. Yeah. Finally, they started giving us that feed, you know, so which is kind of very challenging. You know?
Yeah. So we've talked about the sort of relationship with IT and so forth internally. I guess there's another issue, which is the relationship with operations. Alla's in the operations group. My perception is most of your agencies, at least on this panel, I think there's been buy-in basically within the organizations that data pretty well. My perception is that the buy-in has been pretty widespread. I don't think that's the case in many other transit agencies, where there's a need to actually convince operations folks that there's something valuable. And I don't know, it seems to me, you know, it's the whole use cases, it's developing the dashboards, it's developing things that are actually useful. But I'd be curious to get some reactions about that. I don't know. Pierre, you want to start this one? You there? I don't see him. I think he's muted and stopped the video, but, or Teresa, you want to go? It's even more complicated in your case because Coast Mountain Bus is separate again from TransLink. You're muted too, Teresa.
Yeah, we don't have any problem with the buy-in for data. We have the APC data, AVL data is used extensively at our operating companies, and they've been using it for years. We've actually needed to learn how to use that data more, and then share back with them the smart card data. So we're actually at a point now where we're trying to have those two data sets be more aligned, because they give us different information, and we want to make sure that when we're making a decision, we know about the limitations of both. So we haven't had those problems with the operating company at all. or they haven't had problems with the with TransLink and the data that's coming to them or back to them through that.
That's my perception, but I'll just throw it open to anybody that's, I assume most of you have had pretty widespread buy-in within the organizations, but.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, generally that's true. I mean, generally, you know, the operations groups, you know, have really welcomed the data, you know, the different ways of looking at the data and the advanced analytics that we've been able to provide, and some of the new tools. But it varies a little bit, and the biggest challenge we run into is when, you know, transit tends to be an experience-based organization, an intuition-based organization. You know, senior leaders and people who've been around rely on their intuition, and when the data does not match people's intuition, then we run into a problem, because we get folks who think that they know what the solution, what the answer is, or what's going on. The data says something different, and they ignore it. And so that's really been a challenge for us, is not to get folks to accept the data when it matches their intuition, when it supports what they already believe, when it helps them, you know, to drive home the points they're trying to make. But on the opposite side, when the data says something different, when the data challenges those notions, especially when you start bringing in data from different data sources and merging them to show a different perspective, like a different perspective on on-time performance or a different perspective on ridership, and show how that, you know, where there's disparities, for example, folks start to go, oh, wait a minute. That's not what I thought. That's been a challenge for us.
Even at a very basic level, on-time performance, running times on a run, you know, drivers think it takes forever, and then the dispatchers think likewise, and then you start to say, well, wait a second, here's the, you know, there are points when it's bad, but anyway. Any other comments about that one?
I'll go. This is Ray.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'll echo John's remarks. I was actually going to be more negative than John was, which is good. I'm glad you went first. In that I actually find, like, it's interesting how you pose the question. If you go in and say, like, so I have a doctorate, and that's fine, but I don't ever go into our operations group and say, I'm Raymond Chan, PhD. Let me tell you about how I think you should run your system, right? Like, that's a one-way street to get everyone to tune you out. But you'll find a lot of younger folks who'll do that. They don't have a PhD, but they'll come in with a confidence that really doesn't work in an experience-based organization. But the question sort of, I would argue, is a little leading, in the sense that, like, if you say, can I help you with some data? And they'll say, of course, anything you can do to help us run the agency, including run the bus ourselves, and we'll sit here and sip lemonade, is great. But when it comes down to it, a lot of what I've found, sort of working retail for a way longer than I'd care to admit, and working with folks on the street, is exactly the same. You have to convince someone that this tool is useful. You have to convince them that it's important to them, and it can't just be like a big dashboard, like you're staring at, like a control panel on the Apollo program, right? It has to solve a problem, because they've got a million things to do. And I found that some of the best analysts that I've ever worked with were former bus drivers, because they understood, like, and they would always remind us, it's like, my number one job is don't crash the bus, and my number two job is to collect the fare. Everything else doesn't matter in the end. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because you're just like, oh, can you collect a little bit more data? He's like, I have to not crash the bus, right? So it's really interesting to, like, talk to the operations folks. There's a lot of things that we assume just sort of work. They really want to just show us how the whole sausage is made, and it's really quite interesting. But it's also important to bring our younger folks and our less experienced folks in, so they don't end up stepping on toes.
Yeah. I want to turn, there's so many different questions and topics, but I do want to turn quickly back to the issue about hiring, training, qualified staff. Willem, could you run the second question about how difficult it is?
Yep.
Just get a perception. We've been talking about this, but basically, polling question for the audience and for everybody: how difficult has it been to hire and I know there's a difference between business analysts and data scientists, and I did lump them together for the purposes of making it simple. But if you get 30 seconds, well, it's,
Brendon, I would argue that a lot of job descriptions that are out there that say data scientists really want business analysts. So it's becoming increasingly fuzzy of to what people actually want.
I totally agree. I actually started collecting examples, and I thought, well, I didn't mention this before, but I did a discussion paper on challenges with data in general, which is led to a lot of things. But I thought the next one might be something about these issues we've been talking about. Willem, how are we doing?
We're at 50%. We'll give people a last minute chance to vote.
Okay. But Ray, I totally agree. I've seen some which basically say even data scientists, and you know, they sort of, well, they're just basic planners. I mean, just in 4-step models and stuff like that. I was like, wait a second, that's not what I think a data scientist does. But
all right, I think we've got
okay,
enough for a trend here.
Yeah, let's just show. Oh, again. That's sort of not quite as skewed as I thought it might be, but so we'll close this, but we'll sort of, okay, I'm not going to ask the next question by polling, but I'll just mention and then ask the panelists to comment. I had 3 hypotheses I was going to put out of what is the main challenge in hiring data scientists, business analysts, and it may vary depending on that. One was getting the right budget for making salaries attractive. We've mentioned that already. Second was internal hiring challenges and freezes. And the third was just lack of local availability. So how much you pay them, dealing with internal bureaucracy and freezes. And third, whether you're in a community that actually has availability, and I guess the first one has to do with the competition with other jobs people have.
Do you want me to launch that as a poll, Brendon?
No, I just saying that and I'll throw it out because we're running out of time. Anybody wants to pick that up about what they've had the most problems with?
I'll start again real quick and say that I've helped train a bunch of planners at CTA with some basic data science techniques, not anything sophisticated, but just basic, how do you plot, how do you visualize, how do you use programmatic tools? And then they find jobs somewhere else, because not as though like CTA is a bad place. They love transit. They keep on telling me they want to come back to transit. But we're like in the competition for business analysts and data scientists, or like, let's just say programmatic business analysts and data scientists. Like Google will happily eat everyone that's available if given the chance. Like I can't even imagine how it would be working in the Bay Area or another very tech heavy city. Sorry, Alla. But like it's so appealing. And if they're not a dedicated transit person first, it's so hard to keep them, because you could find salaries that would compete with our VP levels at our agency, and to tell them to like not take a 100% increase in their salary is really, really hard.
Yeah. Alla, maybe you could, because we've had conversations about the tricks he's played to try to get people on board.
So for us, it's issue is mostly in a process, So whenever we put a posting, we get a lot of candidates. Like, because the way we put the posting out, very analytical, like, background in math, statistics, slide programming, things like that, engineering. We get a lot of attractive candidates. Problem is processing. Going through our human resources process and everything, by the time you get hired, it takes 6 months. Recently, we have a candidate, we promised her we can get her, but it took like 9 months. So people, it's very difficult. As far as getting candidates, we are very attractive and people want to come and work for us, which is kind of very interesting, And they become scientists, whatever, titles, but besides, they learn a lot from us. At the same time, they get, after a couple of years, they'll be taken, I mean, they get opportunity. A couple of people last year left from my group into Google. I mean, we can't be able to compete with them, you know. We start very low salary, and from just, you know, for 70, 60,000 to go to 120, 150, it's not easy to keep them, but, you know, it's good, you know. I think this rotation is continuing, but the practice is, it takes too long. People can't wait, you know. That's one of the challenge I face. Even I have vacancies, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
Too complicated, too much investigation, you know. Too many things we have to go through.
You both mentioned Google, but I'm going to say the TNCs as well, because I know several people that have been hired away by the TNCs.
Well, now they're out of work.
Yeah, it may have been a short-term transition. John or Teresa, any thoughts?
Well, I was just gonna say I think half my technical staff is probably watching right now, so I got to be really careful. And I really actually don't appreciate the comments from the other panelists related to what other opportunities might be out there. I think this really is disservice. So hopefully, you know, this recording will not be made available to the rest of my staff. But you know, we've actually been somewhat fortunate, and I don't know if it's the market we're in or the organization or just luck, but we've been fortunate to be able to get, you know, a number of applicants when we've posted data science positions, and to hire some really great folks. You know, we've actually tended to hire out of academia. Has been really successful for us, and just, you know, finding people who really like who do have that, you know, side passion for transit or come to grow into it. Is really important. And so that's why it's also really important to have to have a job in which there's some flexibility. You know, that's something that I've really kind of, as I've led our group, I've just said, you know, rather than always saying exactly what somebody should be working on, I've said, you know, what is interesting to you, and let people focus some on that, because I think that's really important. The job satisfaction of working on something that you like and that you think is important can make up often for salary. And then the other thing I'll say, you know, and you know, Ray mentioned in terms of the jobs, I mean, public sector job stability is important, and you know, and that changes, you know, as we go through economic cycles. But right now we're in a cycle where, you know, we have stability within our organization and a commitment to not lay folks off, and when that is not the case in the private sector. And that's important. And you know, I know that, you know, organizational loyalty isn't what it maybe was in the past, but I do think it's important to have a job that people feel stable in and comfortable and enjoy. And I think that's an important, as well as salary, that's an important piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good.
Yes, I may add. I agree with you on that. When it's fun for people, for data scientists, and they have some autonomy on the question they can look at, on the tools they can develop, that helps much. One of the things I would say is, looks very simple or trivial, but to attract some data scientists, you need data. When you have some data, you can always say to people, well, come here. So we make many presentations at STL in the Congress to tell what we have, what we do, actually, what we want to do. If you want to try, you have a new product and you want to test it on the STL data, come to see us. We'll make a pilot project. So it's good to attract some innovations, but it's also good to attract some very good people of a good level, data scientists to work with us. This is what we're working on. This is exactly what we're doing, actually.
That's a good point, but I think to add on to that, it's not just to develop the tools, but to somehow convince senior management that the tools are important and are used and are recognized, that there's recognition internally that they're doing something useful, so they don't get discouraged over time and say, okay, phooey on this, I'm just going to go to a consulting firm where I make more money, or
What's good also, it's to have some quick wins with small tools, very simple at the beginning, but people realize how interesting it may be, how important it is, and then they help you to convince the upper management to put some money in that. And when you have some quick wins too, it helps convince the upper management and the mayor and the municipality and politicians. And when politicians can have good news with some tools that are made available to their clients or to the population, well, they're more they want to put more money in the transit agency.
Yeah, I think transit agencies are inherently attractive to many people as a place, but it's hard competing. It's maybe harder to compete in big cities. I've always thought that small or medium-sized cities where there's a university, maybe like Minneapolis and so forth, are a little bit easier because, especially if they have spouses and then they settle down, they don't want to be moving around. And if you're in a high-tech firm, you end up anywhere, or you can be remotely, but you're competing in a much bigger market. How about last comments? We just got about 5 minutes left, and maybe I'll start with Teresa. I can't see you anymore right now, but are you still here? Yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts that you want to throw out based on the conversation? I mean, we have a dozen questions, and a lot of them some are very specific and some are general, but I'm afraid we don't have time to go into this. Is clearly a topic for another conference, but not right away. I'll tell you that.
Final comments for me is one. I think, especially from a TransLink's perspective, we're still relatively young and new in terms of our data analytics, even though we've come so far in the past 5 years and we have so many projects that we want to do. But in terms of that more broader acceptance, that's one of our issues that I would say I would add to attracting folks is once we have data scientists in, they do want to work and have lots of data. So we need to keep growing and recognizing that we will have diverse data sets. We need to do more with the data. So we have to get into that predictive modeling, not just historical what happened, and have a career projection that's available to a data scientist that you could see growing through their career in the same way that the planners do or engineers do at any of these companies. And so I think that's one of the other elements of it, notwithstanding the pay in an expensive city where you're competing with a grocer or a retail or other for the data science. It's about creating that community of peers and learning within the organization so that it is fundamental to a lot of the decisions that are being on. So it gets funded and it gets I'd say the leverage it needs within the organization to be a growing element, as opposed to the one-off neat, shiny bauble that might lose some attraction as soon as they're not at the forefront of whatever they're delivering. So I think that's one of the elements that I would say is my final one is you get your data management in, you're starting to attract some younger junior staff, and then together that whole system needs to grow and develop on its own so that there's a career path and there's multiple job opportunities within an organization so people can see their trajectory and have challenges.
Good. Alla, last quick comments.
Okay, one of the things we kind of bring all these new people, you need to encourage them, you need to motivate them in the sense, because they're ambitious, new generation, it's not, and they constantly want to do the new things, So that's the kind of thing you need to keep them and make them to do front presentation to the senior staff. So that's one of the things we try to keep some of the people, they are interested to reach out, and any kind of products or tools they develop, it has to bring it up. Sometimes they do it with interest and it will be sitting there. One of the things like, we did that customer metrics like years back. So leadership changed, then we opened up the doors and they put it out, those kind of things. They have a lot of innovation, so much going on. As long as you provide them that administrative support, top management support, they're willing to work harder, You need to keep up. It's not easy because nowadays these young people, they want to do a lot more, and try to put it out,
Yeah, great. And I meant comments on anything as well. I mean, the people are important. And Ray, how about you?
So I'm in technology. I'm in the technology group, which we have a very clear, separate distinction. Well, though we're in technology, there's IT and then there's developers, and they're different. And I would say a lot of folks who are getting into the field of data and data work, whether they're an analyst or a scientist, are really kind of in the development environment. And a lot of the IT folks are not developers, they're not software engineers, and they don't think in the same way that other folks are. So I would say a lot of times it's a lot of bridging the gaps. I've taken a lot of cues from them and just understanding what their issues are. And a lot of times they will say, people just leave us with the stuff that was kind of ill created, and then they're expected to fix it because we're like, if you ever work in technology, someone will always tell you about a great app idea they've had and wonder if you can build it, regardless if you're just a database administrator or you're just keeping lights on in the building, right? And I do definitely agree that technology has a long way to go to try to bridge the gap as well, but there's definitely a middle ground where there's a really interesting synergy, and getting organizations there are really hard because they, you have this legacy, even at the smallest agencies, of, we know how to run buses, and we run buses for 100 years without data, so I don't need any data. So just trying to bring those groups together because they have the same infrastructure issues as our like traditional hard columns and steel rails infrastructure group has. They're always looking for money to do maintenance, and they're always looking for money to improve their business processes. So a lot of times the words are the same. You just have to kind of fill in the details with what they're particularly looking at. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, as much as I've been negative, to really bridge the gap and to really get a really good synergy forward. And I know I've done that in CTA to really kind of bring the groups together and to make sure the avenues are open.
Great. Pierre, are you still on? I don't see you.
Yes, I'm still there, but
okay, good.
Nothing to add on that.
Okay, great. And I'll give the last word to John then.
Well, I just, I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I want to agree with Raymond that, I think a positive perspective here is really important. So much of what we do is value added to organizations that are already kind of running pretty well in many cases. And so in those instances, I think, just figuring out how we can deliver the best value with data in an organization from wherever we sit is really important. And it does take some introspection, and it does take some, ideally coordination with senior leadership. And we haven't talked a whole lot about the role of senior leadership in this, but they're really important and can really help or hinder depending on their approach. So maybe a conversation for another time, but I've certainly got a lot from this conversation. So I really appreciate kind of having it be part of this this entire conference, because it really is an important piece of that whole flow of research into practice. Is what can the organizations actually do with these research concepts and with these data concepts to actually drive bottom line improvement in transit offering that we're making. So really appreciate the opportunity to take part.
I thank you very much. When it's my role as chair of a committee at TRB, I organized panels on various topics, and suddenly had a light bulb go off that 95% or 90% of the presentations were all about technical issues, and yet the technical issues can always be solved. The problems are always human, political, and organizational. So I thought it would be useful to have a conversation about that. So we have our break, 15-minute break, and then we go into parallel sessions. So thank you all for participating, and it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye for now.